Good evening, everyone. Going to give people just a minute or so to trickle in, and then we will get started. As you come in, you're going to see a poll, just a little poll launch. If you don't mind filling that out, then you can click out of it. I do want to make sure that I leave time for questions at the end, so we'll go ahead and slowly get the ball rolling. And as I talk, if you just want to fill out that little poll box that just popped up, that would be wonderful. My name is Tal Kitron. I've been with Applerouth for a little over 10 years. I work as a tutor, mostly doing SAT, PSAT, and ACT, and then also as an executive function coach, which is more pertinent to our topic this evening. As we approach AP exams and then final exams, a lot of students, especially juniors in high school, which is mainly what I work with, are just feeling the mental fatigue, feeling the burnout, right? And so a lot of times that results in us losing track of our structure, our organization, and the process for studying. So the goal today is give you guys some tools, maybe remind us of some things that we have done in the past but aren't doing as much as we could. And then, like I said, we'll open it up for questions at the end as well, making sure that I answer any of those that come up. As we go through, if you do have questions arise, you can put them in the Q&A, and I'll get to those at the end. So again, Applerouth's cornerstones are really academic tutoring and test prep. And in the past few years, we've begun to do a lot of executive function coaching. This presentation, though, is more from the eyes of a parent or a student, right? Not a coach. I want to kind of tell you guys, here are things you can do on your own, right? Aside from actually getting a coach or someone to help you with it. So let's start with just what are executive executive function skills, EF skills. These are skills that we all have in a spectrum, and everyone has them. And even without coaching or help, they do develop, they do improve over time, especially when you're younger. Executive functions include things like things that we just kind of don't think about on a daily basis, but that are crucial. Planning ahead, prioritization, thinking through solutions instead of acting on impulse. So in a nutshell, executive function involves how do we manage ourselves, our resources, and how do we monitor behaviors that help us achieve goals that we set. And again, these are all on a spectrum. We all have them in our own unique balance. Somebody may be very, very strong with their planning, right? They plan ahead, they have it really laid out, they schedule well. But then when it comes to actually doing the work, the time management isn't there. And we thought something that would take an hour took 3 hours, right? Others might be very strong with time management, but they didn't plan ahead. So they're still going to be crunched towards the test date or deadline. These skills, like I said, can be developed just through life, but if you target them, you can really hone in on certain skills, and improving them will help you prepare for and succeed on exams, APs, but also just in life. These are skills that are not just good for academics, but will help us in the day-to-day. EF is mostly about metacognition, so thinking about how you do what you do. So not just what we're doing, like I'm going to do my homework at 5, or how I'm going to do it, or sorry, what I'm going to study for my test at 6 p.m. That would be what I'm doing. But if you dig into how, well, okay, what materials do I need? In the past, what has worked for me, right? So reflecting on prior successes and failures can be super helpful as you think about what's working for you and what doesn't. So maybe there was a certain strategy you used to study for your Spanish test, right? And instead of doing flashcards, you instead stood in front of the mirror and you said things out loud, and that helped. So maybe that's something you'll repeat for Spanish next time. On the flip side, maybe we tried something for a test and it didn't work that well. We felt like we were spinning our tires and it wasn't efficient. So maybe that's a strategy that I wouldn't employ next time. So thinking about how you do what you do, and then self-reflection is just a big part of developing EF skills. In that same vein, we want to recognize and know our patterns, good and bad. So for example, if we know that time management is an issue, a lot of that is what I work on with SAT, ACT. So maybe we have to modify how we actually attack the test, or maybe just modify how we prepare. Right? If you're finding yourself distracted when studying, we'll talk about how you can give yourself a better environment to study, minimize distractions. Another thing I see a lot, honestly, a lot of times with male student athletes are often overconfident. And then actually a lot of my female students, especially on math, tend to be underconfident, and they don't need to be because, most of the time they're great at it. But there's this thing that happens in high school where there's just a shift. And so it's not just by gender, but there are plenty of students who are going to be, oh, I know I'm prepared, I've got this. But then inevitably something will come up on test day they weren't ready for. And then there are other students who are underconfident. They can prepare, and they're not certain. And that can lead to anxiety, which might harm our test day performance. Right. And then, of course, sometimes people are right on target. Hey, I think I'm going to do well, and I do well. Right. I haven't studied enough. I'm going to do poorly, and I do poorly. That's a skill, right? Not everyone can predict that accurately. So we got to identify patterns and be willing to shift, be adaptable, come at it from a lens of curiosity. And if something that you are doing studying wise, or structure, organization, right? Maybe the way you're having your homework structured in your backpack is just not doing it for you, be willing to shift, adapt, create a new pattern if that's the case. So I want to we'll talk a little bit from the lens of like preparing for finals and AP exams. But again, executive functions are going to help throughout the semester, and even just again in life, like at your job, for example. I do think a big part of this though is goal setting, right? So thinking strategically, looking at where you're at, and then establishing a goal, for example, for a final exam, right? So I know what I need to get to get this GPA, and then that allows you to know what you need to get on your final. So here's some examples. Let's say we want an A or a B in every class. So how would we prioritize? Well, in AP World, I've got an 88.4. That's a very high B. I do need a 92 on the exam to get an A. So the final is worth a lot. If I get a 92 or above, we calculate that. That means it's high priority. I really need to get an A, and it can't be like a very low 90s A. Then environmental science, we're doing great, 97.5. I could almost fail the test, which I won't, but still get an A. So I'm not going to prioritize that, right? So just knowing that off the bat, that I can spend more time on AP World than environmental science, is huge. Then let's say we've got an 84 in honors algebra. I'm probably not going to get to an A unless I get like 100 plus extra credit. But if the final exam is hard and I get a very low score, I could drop to a C. So probably not going to bomb it that badly, but I'll make sure I give it a little bit of time. And then honors Spanish is an 80. That's a huge priority, because unless I get a B or higher, it's going to maybe drop my score down to a C, my grade. So this is just an example. Everyone has different classes, different grades, but we can definitely sort it out and think, all right, which of these deserves more of my time and energy, especially initially. And I do think that because procrastination is such a big issue for high school students, I think a lot of that comes from prioritization, right? So making sure that we actually know what our more critical tasks are, so that we can then allocate and dedicate more time to them. So many of my students, they're doing March and May SAT, but then they've also got final exams, and they've got APs in May and April. So if that's the case, which it is for many students, we got to prioritize. So just like we saw, right, is there anything that we know, hey, I'm going to get an A, I'm okay here, or I'm just safe, my grade's probably not going to change too much. So then as we plan, and we'll talk a bit physically about how you can do that too, with calendars and all that, but treat every subject distinctly, right? Really think about, all right, this is the 2 weeks leading up to finals. Here are the other things I've got coming up. How much time do I really need to allocate to this class and this test and this class. And then what's the difference in how I'm going to study? So again, this is all just out of curiosity. You're thinking to yourself, but then really crafting your plan, right? So maybe one is just reviewing your notes, whereas another, I've got a study group that I've got to meet with, and that's a better way to study. Timing will, of course, be crucial. We want to study leading up to the test itself and not leave too much time as a gap. And then before you're crafting your plan, this is just like outlining an essay, right? Almost nobody does it, but you're supposed to write out a framework, kind of skeleton of what you're going to do, and then you just fit everything into that framework. Same thing is true for EF when you're crafting a plan. First, we plan, and then we have tools for review. As we get into the actual like skills and how to develop them and little tools we can use, I mentioned goal setting, and I think motivation is directly related. Motivation comes from different places, and sometimes it takes a while. For example, for test prep, some sophomores just haven't, it hasn't clicked yet. They're not ready yet. We have to postpone. We got to wait till junior year when they're thinking about college and really knowing, hey, I need this score to be as high as it can be. Making sure your goals are specific and measurable, right? Not just I want all A's, but how do I actually get there? Writing things down is very important. We'll talk about that more, but even just intent and goals, write it down somewhere, make it real. And then for finals, you know, we want to come in and we want to know the test, right? So for example, looking at the syllabus, knowing how many questions you can miss and still achieve your goal, right? For SAT, that could be a thing, right? I know I can miss 3 questions on module 1 and 5 on module 2, and then based on my practice, I'll get the score I want. And that's how you calibrate progress. I can never tell people what a good standardized test score is. It depends on where you start, right? And how much effort you've put in, how much we've improved or progressed. So we have a goal and then we calibrate progress accordingly and just measure and see how we're doing. So then when we're doing the actual studying itself, we'll talk about the 50-10 rule. So like Pomodoro technique where you spend 50 minutes on a task and then 10 minutes doing something different, short breaks. This suggests every 30 minutes or so. And I think that's different from person to person. But also if it's a subject that is really a grind, like man, French is tough for me, it really is mentally taxing, then maybe every 30 minutes you need a quick change of scenery. Whereas if it's math and that's your thing, right, and you can do math for hours, you still want to force yourself to take a break after 50 minutes or so, but you don't need to do it every half hour. Active breaks are by far the best. So that could be as simple as, you know, some shoulder or neck rolls, moving, walking, going outside, even looking at pictures of nature has been shown to replenish glucose stores and cognitive ability. And so it's just a matter of like not taking such a long break where we're interfering. So not switching and going, you know, onto social media or Discord or playing a game, right? You want to make sure that your breaks are at least a little bit regimented. So you're getting a snack, you're doing something that's not going to take a long time, right? And not going to really suck your energy away. So that when you jump back in, you've got this little break, right? We've rested a bit, but you're still in the zone of what you've been studying. This is really a hard thing and it's a balance because it's very easy to say, all right, I'm taking a break. And then we just all of a sudden make it 20, 30 minutes and then we're on to something different. So it's just very important to think of it as like, this is a short break in action in my 2-hour block of work. How do we monitor that? So I mentioned the Pomodoro technique, learning to structure time, build in breaks, and then that has to do with keeping good boundaries, right? We're not going to do great if we're just working, we're exhausted. In law school, for example, this was unorthodox, but for me, if I got really tired at midnight, I wasn't going to pull an all-nighter. I would stop, I would nap, I would sleep from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., wake up and do the rest of my work. And I'd be much more effective having had that sleep because I just knew I was tired. Words were bouncing around on the page. It wasn't as efficient as it could have been. So as students, we have to keep those good boundaries, healthy boundaries, and making sure that we're not just working ourselves to the bone and burning out, because burnout is definitely a real factor this time of year. Aside from the timing aspect and the planning and the prioritizing, we got to make sure our workspace is on point. That's both digital and physical. But if you have like a lot of distractions, you've got phone here, you've got TV there, you've got apps on the computer that you know you kind of are well-worn paths for you, then you really have to use willpower to avoid clicking them. I'm going to stick with what I'm studying. I'm not going to click on all my distractions. If those distractions are not available and you decrease the possibility of that off-task behavior, well, you have to rely less on willpower, right? It's much easier to just keep working because your phone's in the other room charging, it's off. TV is not an option. I have put do not disturb on my phone. Like, you create that environment and you just aren't going to be as drawn into these distractions. Make what's easy hard and what's hard easy. And what that means is if you have a standard time waster, right? Like I said, Reddit or Discord or Instagram or whatever it is, or Snapchat, you have to make that a little bit harder to access for yourself, at least in the times that you're dedicating to study. So just acknowledge it. This is metacognition and this is executive functioning. Is, dang, I realize these are the ways I lose time, right? When I'm supposed to be working and all of a sudden I'm texting. So there's some definite website blockers you can use. There's apps like Stay Focused and Freedom that can just limit the time you spend on an app. And then the simplest thing is just turn the phone off, put it in the other room, put it in airplane mode. Easier said than done, right? But the biggest task during final exam season as you prepare for like a big event or test is just try to make those easy paths a little bit more difficult for yourself to access. So we mentioned boundaries. When we are working, we are just working, but that also means we need good quality playtime. And even just like rest time. If you're eating breakfast, you don't really want to be doing something else. Even if that's watching TV, right? Or especially if it's studying or working, it's very unhealthy to blur those boundaries because then it just creates blurred lines. It creates anxiety for a lot of people. And we don't have this feeling of, all right, when I'm doing this, I don't have to think about school. I don't have to think about work. I don't have to think about this upcoming test. Right. So even if whether that's an extracurricular or it's gaming with friends, right, or it's just going to a movie or something, just hanging out, separating that work time and playtime. Another thing that's easier said than done because we get notifications, right? So like I've had to turn Gmail notifications off, right? Or else my wife will get frustrated with me if on a trip I just see constant emails popping up and I want to respond, right? But if it's not an emergency, you can wait. And so as you think about making what's easy hard and what's hard easy, right? So if social media is your go-to, make that difficult to access, whether you're deleting the app from the home screen, right? Or just going on airplane mode or whatever it is. And a lot of this won't be easy. It's easy to think about at first and maybe even somewhat easy to acknowledge, here's where I struggle. But then it can be annoying and difficult and painful to kind of try to work through it, at least at first. So that's where a coach can help, right? If you know planning is not easy for you, you got to think about it and talk about how can we make it easy? How can we make it better suited to you? Right. And that might be, well, I'm not using my technology properly, or maybe I'm more of an analog person. I just need the big calendar up on my wall. Right. Everyone's different, but there are certain tools that work for most people. Procrastination is a big thing. I mean, even for adults too, it's just easy to wait till the last minute to do something. Shift from being unconscious to being conscious about your particular style of procrastination, the how and the why. So it's not enough just to say, yeah, I always leave it to the last minute, but I'm good under pressure, which can be true, but is often self-justified BS to help us justify that procrastination. I work best under pressure. Well, no, you just kind of have to get it done now. Think about what the resistance is. Is it fear of failure? Is it fear of success? Is it I just would rather do something else, or is it a combination? And then once you understand that, come up with a plan of how you'll counter it. So when those feelings arise, you got to be able to then react in the moment and think, okay, well, this is what my mind does, right? I know I have to do this work. It's on my calendar. I put it there. It's technically not due for 5 days. So I know I could go and I could play video games. I can do that now and not suffer the consequences till later. So you need to come up with some sort of plan. How will you counter that? Right? Maybe you negotiate with yourself. Well, if I go play video games now, then like, self punishing of some sort. I think self rewarding is often better, right? If I study for 2 hours now, I can do 30 minutes of video game, right? If it's not going to affect my sleep too much. And the biggest part with procrastination and prioritization is do the hardest stuff first, right? That's true on SAT as well sometimes, where like you want to knock out some of the hard questions first. But then you reward yourself with the easy things at the end, right? I've got this tough stuff done, right? I've still got more work, but this is easier than what I've just done. Many students struggle, many adults too, struggle with seeking help. It's just a thing that we don't really do much societally, or do very well in a lot of communities. But office hours for teachers are a great way to just show your interest, right? That you care about your grades and that you care about the result in class. Reaching out to the teacher within reason. Most teachers, I think, like that. I always did when I taught in school, right? If somebody sent me a message, I always just treated it as, hey, this is someone who cares and has a question, I'll answer. Small groups, study partners can be good. Seek out tutoring. I mean, of course, I'm biased towards that. In high school, I had no idea tutoring was a thing, but like for academic help, great. For test prep, of course, there's a lot of that. Search, and what tutoring can help with, of course, is not just the material itself, but the structure, right? The organization, the planning. Searching the internet. So, of course, that's just if you have a specific question and need help, beware of AI falsehoods. And then use a study guide, right? That's just more about being prepared and using a syllabus. So, as the exam approaches, you want to make sure you know what's on it. That's your responsibility. But this effective advocacy is something we're not often good at. So parents can help with this. I think teachers and mentors can help too. We need to recognize when we need support, how to ask for help, and then who to ask, when to ask. Right. So it's really just about thinking, okay, do I have a good resource? Is there a certain teacher who I want to ask, even for a letter of recommendation, something like that? Be proactive about it, and talk to others. Think about when is the right time. Right? Should I do that a year before my college apps or 6 months? Right? What's going to be both respectful to them, but also get you your letter of rec in time? Right? Or as a test approaches, we need to know, like, are there office hours? Is there a teaching assistant? Right? We need to figure out who to ask, and then what's my deadline? When's the last day I can ask for help? So as we think about incorporating breaks, that also means we can't do super, super long blocks of time working. Multiple short sessions is better. So 5 30-minute study sessions is better than one 2.5 hour session. Because by the end, you're just going to be tired, right? You're not going to get as much out of it. So you can take breaks. Again, little breaks are good. You just don't want it to interfere. So making sure you're managing that and not going on like a long 20 30-minute well-worn path break. I'm big on calendars. Most executive function coaches are huge on this, where they want you to have like the big wall calendar and you write stuff there. A lot of people have this on their fridge as well, but it can be for a family, or it can just be for yourself. I think it's good to have one on your own. And so this is for exams, but it can also just be for all school year, right? Day-to-day activity. That being said, I would also put everything in my phone. Google Calendar, I don't know how anyone gets by without using it. It's not only good for planning out assignments and events, but also breaks. You want to schedule in downtime. right? So if it's final exam week, you don't want to say, all right, I'm going to study from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. It's not realistic, right? It's not even worth putting on the calendar. Instead, you have to break it up into pieces, make sure you're building in time for lunch and or a nap, right? Or just a short break. So you're not just working, right? Be kind to yourself as you work and study. It'll pay off both, just it'll make you feel better, but it'll also pay off as far as what you keep in your working memory. So here's an example of maybe more like a college final exam schedule, but could be high school. And the things I want you to note are we've got 5 tests in 4 days. So prioritizing and planning is really important. And it looks like we're spending a lot of time on history because that's the first exam. So that makes a lot of sense, right? History is here and here and here and here and here right before the test. Noticing, I think probably the hardest thing of this schedule is the 2 tests back to back, right? So I'm going to study for history, but then all of a sudden I've got chemistry, totally different part of the brain. When that's done, though, we've got some time for lunch, and then we're all of a sudden reviewing for tomorrow's test, right? But then a little bit of English, Spanish, math, and that way in the next 2 days, we're not cramming for those tests. We have some scheduled sleep and snack and Starbucks worked into our day. More is more here. I would say scheduling every little thing, right? And get a sense of, you can color code it, get a sense of what works for you and what doesn't. But I would just definitely be using the Google Calendar app for pretty much everyone. So we'll just talk a bit about exams specifically, how to review effectively. Again, I think this applies for all aspects of school and some of life. Kathleen Kriza is a big name in the field. So chunk, chew, check is her method she came up with. And it's just generally how to learn best. The chunk would be a chunk of material. You learn for every 2 minutes, you learn a chunk of material. We need a couple minutes to chew on it, to process it. So you can't just learn and not actually take a second to think about it. And then once you've read it or studied it and then chewed on it a bit, check your comprehension. So let me ask myself a question that the teacher might ask on a final. And if I understand it and can respond, great. I would write down. I think we'll talk more about that, but writing things down is important. Break things up into smaller bits, process what you learn, verify that you know it by checking and testing, and then move on. Testing can be as simple as talking to yourself or a parent or a pet or a friend, or like I said, getting a question and writing down the answer to see if you're satisfied with your response. We have said it is better to distribute over time. Block studying, so if you got 3 finals and you're going chemistry, history, Spanish, that will not be as effective for keeping stuff in your working memory as it will be to do a little bit of each class and then come back, right? So that way, once you finish studying for test C, you haven't completely forgotten about test A. That would be the hope. This was just a study that was done. And so for those who did blocked practice, during the practice itself, the blockers, they had 89% accuracy. They really recall just about everything. But then if you waited a week, the people who mixed stuff up actually had a higher accuracy than they did during practice because they retained it more. And then the blockers had totally forgotten it, which you'll see a lot of in school. I study for a math test, and then 2 days later, it's completely gone from my brain. So mixing and breaking things up better than block study. We want to be active learners. The more passively we learn, the less likely it is that our knowledge will actually stick. So examples of passive learning would be final exams approaching. I'm going to get a perfect copy of the teacher's notes. Somehow those are on file somewhere. That's not actually that helpful because there's no struggle. This is someone else's words. Same with rereading a chapter. Unless you're doing something on your own, it usually doesn't help that much. Maybe if you're annotating, taking notes, okay. So what we do is move around, take a walk, exercise, go into nature, allow your processing to reset. And as you're doing this, it's really more about reviewing your own notes, right? And changing things up based on the class or the teacher or the test or what's working and isn't working for you. But the more you can kind of paraphrase and write stuff down and do things on your own and ask your own questions, the better. Some strategies for testing yourself and for preparing for an exam, for example, AP or final. Making a study guide, which could be as simple as here are the units I need to cover, right? And some bullet point stuff. Creating concept maps. And so that is definitely for certain classes better than others, but it can help you identify here's the concepts that I really understand, and here's ones I need to flesh out more. Making outlines, that's big for law school, but it's really just organizing. So it's just about putting stuff in the right structure so that it registers more clearly for you, right, and sits well in your mind. I think all of that kind of relates to making lists of topics that could show up on test day, things we know they're going to be tested. If it's a test where you're going to be asked to have short answers and take a position, write out some pros and cons, or even some specific examples. If there's end of chapter questions in the text, write your answers there. Look for themes. These are all just little things that you want to be doing as you study. And some in combination and some will only be applicable for certain classes. But these are all strategies that could work. And then as you review notes for a final exam, a lot of people are color coding. I would do this in Google Calendar as well, right? Making sure you've got different, like if you've got study date and test and something else all for one class, put that all as purple, right? And something else can be green. So even with your notes and your textbooks and your binders, right? Maybe in history, everything that has to do with the famous people would be red, whereas events are green, and then just historical concepts that they might ask about are going to be blue. And maybe in math class, we've got our formulas are red, our vocab words are yellow, and then our proofs are green. That can help a lot just because then it's seeing different things, right? So like that will help you remember it on test day a bit better if you break it up like that. As you review your notes for a final, start really being curious. So ask yourself questions, but then write out the answers. Who, what, where, when, why, how, all those basic W's and then how. And then do write it out. If you force yourself to do that, I promise that on test day, it's going to be a piece of cake, right? I've already done this before. I've already written it. I kind of know what I'm expecting. It's not nebulous and just, I hope it's going to be good. And then we talked about like syllabi and making sure that if there's a study guide, you have it. Always know what to expect. If it's an exam, know what it's going to cover, right? Get a clear picture of what the material is. This is what you've been covering in class. Some teachers, though, kind of are out there and will test something they didn't teach about that much, right? Others are very straightforward and say, this will be on the test a lot. So is it multiple choice? Figure out the format. How many questions? What do the written responses need to look like? What is the teacher looking for? What's the rubric for grading? If it's a math or science test, will I get partial credit for a correct step? Or if I don't know, should I just skip it because I'm going to be wrong? These are all little things that you want to know. Don't find that out on test day, right? There's no purpose to that. In the interest of advocacy and seeking help, do not be nervous to ask a teacher, how can I best prepare for your tests, right? Unless they're telling you all the time and you should know this, this is a very valid question, right? What can I do? And even just like if you don't love your grade or you're concerned about something, demonstrate that you care and just say, hey, are there any, the worst thing the teacher could say is no, right? But anything for extra credit that I can do. I really like your class and I hate that I have a B. I'd really love to boost it to an A. What can I do? Is there anything that I can do for that? And again, worst thing they can say is, no, I'm sorry. You just got to do better on the next test. But a lot of teachers, when they hear, man, this person cares, they're going to give you some sort of avenue to improve your grade. knowing multiple choice, or if it's short answer or both. On SAT, you can't move freely from one section to another, but on some tests you can, right? So if we finish section 1, am I allowed to go back to, or section 1, can I go back there on section 2 or not? Not only what topics do I need to know, but what's the depth of information I'm expected to know? Do I have to relate certain chapters, or is it all going to kind of be within its own topic? And like we said, partial credit, and also just overall, how important is this test? Do I prioritize it a lot or a little? So for some people, 30 minutes on, 5 off is better. 50 minutes of studying, 10 minutes of not is pretty good for most. So like when I do a tutoring session online, that's about what we do. We work for 45 or 50 minutes. We take 5-ish minutes of a break, right? Maximum 10. And then just making sure that when you're working, you've got the distractions put away, right? That's the phone is the easiest. It's the hardest to avoid. It's the easiest to just go to. And some people can work well with music in headphones or just playing. Most of us are not multitaskers and cannot. Weirdly for me, I never really liked listening to classical music while doing work, but I could listen to rock and ignore it. But I think that's very much rare. And most people, if they're listening to music, it's something that's competing for attention, not facilitating your study. This is the most important, but also the hardest thing. It's easy for me to say, but it's harder for me or anyone to do. And if you're a parent or guardian thinking, well, how am I supposed to get my student to do it? It's even tougher because at this age, a lot of stuff from mom and dad falls on deaf ears, sadly. That's where a coach can help. It's a mentor, it's someone who's outside of the family who can kind of say, well, here's, what I've noticed that works for most students and doesn't work. And then maybe hearing it from outside of the family, a lot of times that's what it takes to click. But it's just one of those things that at some point, the student themselves, you just need to take ownership and say, all right, this is where I'm losing time and efficiency, right? It's harming my performance. So I've got to put away these distractions. You've got to force yourself to do it. So then last little bit here is as we set up for a final exam, what are we going to do? Step 1. And so this is something you got to think about, even if it's a few months away. Step 1 will be review your notes. So hopefully we're taking good notes throughout different classes, different requirements, but refresh your memory first. Same with the study guide if there is one. I mean, that's definitely a go-to. Circle and make a list of the stuff you don't know very well. Third step is go to the textbook, right, or whatever the teacher is using. Don't try to just reread it, because what you'll do is you'll read it and you'll be like, oh gosh, I just zoned out, right? We can't hold it all in. We want to maybe focus in on little benchmarks. That could be pictures, formulas, maps, right? That'll help you kind of have little guide points along the way. And then from that study guide and your notes, you do want to, as you go into the text, focus on the topics you're feeling weakest in naturally, right? Do those first because it's hardest, but also most important. As you go through, if you know a topic, move on, of course. Don't go astray. Make sure that the topics you're focusing on are in the study guide or the relevant unit you're dealing with. If it's not multiple choice, but there's also a written response, ask the teacher, ask students, but also think about what is the teacher emphasized, right? What do I think realistically they might ask me to write about? And then try that a little bit, play with that and write a little bit about it to make sure you feel good. Fourth step, so again, third is review the textbook. After that, reviewing your notes again. So now I've kind of gone through, hopefully I've reinforced the topics that I wasn't sure of, but if there are things I still need more material for, I now have a better idea and we can refer back to the text one more time. So it's a lot of back and forth, but there is a method to the madness. And can't emphasize enough, the more you write things down, the better. Generate and create. To remember, working memory is how much we can keep in our mind at one time. And it's much more likely to stick if we actually write it down rather than just think about it. Think of a waiter or waitress taking 20 orders very confidently and saying, all right, I got it. It sometimes works out. Some people are able to do it, but most people just should probably write it down if they're going to get the order totally right. Study groups and partners are good as long as it's not a distraction, right? If everyone's there for the correct reason and working well together, then that could be a great tool. All right, got 20 minutes. I think this will take us maybe 5-ish, and then I'll leave some time for questions. So just some final notes on test day strategies. Actually, not even 5, just a couple minutes here. So for SAT, the first thing we always, or last thing we always do before test day is make a checklist. I'm going to bring my calculator, my pencils with erasers, snack, water, overshirt. Like nothing is too obvious. That same is true for AP exams, right? Or for a final at school or any test. Make sure you know what's allowed, right? Is it a digital thing, right? Is it on computer or is it on paper? If it's math, do I have a calculator the whole time? I better make sure my calculator is charged. Is it an open book test? I want to make sure I've got my book with me and marked up accordingly, right? So just knowing in advance what's coming and what to expect and what to bring. And what I'm struggling with students this time of year more than anything is eat right, but mostly sleep right. Because I say, get good sleep and they scoff, right? High school students are like, I don't know what a good night's sleep feels like anymore, which is sad. But the reality, I still think that the number one indicator of success on test day, other than your initial effort, is the good night's sleep the night before the test. So if you got a Friday final, Wednesday night's sleep is probably the most important. You're not going to be able to on Thursday at 8 p.m. just say, all right, I'm going to wrap it up, I'm going to bed. It doesn't work like that. But if you get a good night's sleep on Wednesday, your circadian rhythms are getting in place. And then Thursday, you're more likely to fall asleep at a normal hour. Don't change anything, too great before a test, even a big test. If you are someone who runs in the morning or like does activity, then do that. If you're not, then don't. If you're somebody who eats a big breakfast, then do that. But if you're not, then maybe just a little breakfast, right? And make sure you bring a snack so that you can maintain throughout, right? We want sustenance as we go so that we don't have little things like hunger, right? Or just something silly distracting us. And then final tips for the next few months, after which we'll open up to any questions you guys have. Study sessions, individual and or group. Make use of Google Calendar, build checkpoints into your schedule. So stop and ask yourself, is this plan working, right? I had this set plan for AP chemistry, but it's not working. And so we just have to recalibrate. And if that happens, that's okay. This could be a hard thing, right? Like people often don't think about the way they think. And when you start, you have all these revelations. We're not going to do everything right at first, right? So like, man, I changed this and I put away distractions, but my grades aren't going up. Studying is still not working. And it's just going to be a thing where people get this negative feedback cycle. So you just have to realize that if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. It actually is progress. It's a new thing that you've discovered. Hey, this isn't working for me. And that is information, valuable information that can guide you to what does work. This is a process, just like getting on the right medications can be really hard, right? And it's a great first step to do it, but sometimes the first medications don't work the way they should. They make things worse, right? So, and if things have been a struggle, you don't really want to expect, oh, this is going to be a magic fix. Now that I'm using a calendar and my phone's in the other room, like I'm just going to be an absolute beast of studying and no problems ever again. It's not realistic, but marginal improvement and progress is what we're looking for, right? It doesn't have to be all in one, getting it totally different. And now I'm an amazing studier. So be gentle with yourselves. We're going to launch one more little poll here as I open it up for questions. And so I think we've got plenty of time. So I'll open up for as many questions as we want. If you are satisfied, please feel free to call it an evening and thank you for joining. But yeah, let's take some time. This poll will launch in a second, and then I'm going to leave it open for some Q&A. Anything about executive function, Applerouth itself, or just regular, school year student questions, whatever you got. course, if you don't have questions yet, but think you may, take down this email and phone number, and you can always reach out to Applerouth directly. No questions yet. I'll leave it for another minute or two and see if any come up. Yeah, for those of you asking about the recording, yes, it's recorded, and you will, if you're signed up for this presentation, you'll receive a link later in the week. Got a nice question. So you're very welcome. So yes, I agree. All of this is so much easier said than done. So this question is about like coaching. So is a meeting once a week sufficient? The answer is at first, sometimes not. Usually when I do coaching, I start with two 30-minute sessions per week. Do that for at least a few weeks, but then the goal is to make it so that it's once a week, and then at some point once every couple of weeks, and then you let the student fly off on their own. Because as a coach, you don't want to be a guru who's saying this is how you do it. You have to get to know the student, get to know really the ins and outs of how they operate, both good and bad, and then give them the agency and the tools to do it on their own. Right. So then at that point, I'm just kind of checking in to make sure, give some accountability and help as needed. But the goal would be after a few weeks of meeting multiple times per week for 30 minutes, then you can kind of extend that to 30 minutes once a week. The other part of this question is, as a parent, it can be very hard to know when materials are due, right? Assignments. So that's where I think the Google Calendar can help a ton. It's kind of the sneaky way to create accountability, but it's beneficial for the student, right? So like it's not where now you have a test coming home with A written on it or B in notes, right? It's a lot more about portals and kind of understanding. So many parents struggle with that, right? And the students are like very tech savvy and understand, but parents maybe not. So I do think that's an avenue for collaboration. As a coach, we could definitely help with that, but it's one of those things where as soon as you get like the calendar set up in a way where the student and the parents can both access it and see it, ideally only the student is the person adding and removing things from it, but it creates accountability and a little bit more transparency and helps you guys as parents know a bit more about what's going on. Because yeah, I agree. It's so much easier said than done. Yeah, good question. Again, my name's Tal, Tal, Kitron, Kitron. Reach out to Applerouth with other questions. I really appreciate you guys joining and hope it was beneficial. And then I'm just wishing all of you and your students good luck the rest of this semester. Thanks again.